Now we're moving on to the commandments that talk mainly about our relationships with each other. We're looking at the 5th commandment, honor your father and your mother. Now this commandment joins the previous one in beginning with a positive command. And while the 4th commandment focused mainly on worshiping God, the 5th commandment focuses mainly on how we treat our parents, but also mentions God in its promise. In the Gospel of Matthew, when a young man asks Jesus what he has to do to have eternal life, Jesus says, "Keep the commandments." When the young man asks, "Which ones?" Jesus answers by quoting the next 4 commandments and this one, emphasizing commandments that deal with how we treat each other, and reminding us that the greatest test of whether we love God is how we express love to our neighbor. But who is our neighbor? In the verses before it says, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." Leviticus 19 identifies our neighbors as the poor, the foreigner, the laborer, the deaf, the blind, and our fellow citizens. So our neighbors include the very people on the margins of society who are often ignored by their community. The rest of the commandments deal with how we relate to our neighbor, and they begin at home with the 5th commandment, which talks about the relationship between children and their parents. I was shocked to learn the original meaning of this commandment. It wasn't invented by Moses to get his kids to clean their rooms. Instead, it was likely addressed to adults, commanding them to take care of and respect their retirement-age parents. This commandment is the only one with a promise, and its promise makes sense knowing its original purpose. It says, "Your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you." Just as the previous commandment expressed God's concern for powerless servants, this commandment demands that we care for members of the community who can no longer take care of themselves. Just as the previous commandment reveals that non-stop work is not the only reason for life, this commandment reveals that those who can no longer work should still be treated with honor. It encourages us not to dishonor, disrespect, or neglect the parents or parental figures we have depended on as we claim our independence as adults. Since God is described in the Old Testament as both father and mother, this commandment can also be seen as urging us to honor God, even when we think we have everything under control. In fact, the Hebrew verb translated in this commandment as honor can also mean give weight to and glorify, and it's often used to describe the reverence with which we should treat God. This is the awesome depth of respect with which this commandment encourages us to treat our parents. The Bible resources that I quoted in this podcast are listed on the Sunday School section of the tmcyouth.com website.
This podcast is produced and copyrighted by the First Church of Christ Scientists in Boston.